Hi. So I am well aware that I am in between you and beer. Unfortunately, no matter how quickly I talk, they will not start serving beer early. So it's not like we just be like one and done and just skip straight from here to the end. So we have to go through a little bit of content. But I will try to keep this fairly punchy and engaged, even as people file out. Thank you for coming. Thanks. That's cool. But thank all of you for staying, and I'm going to try to keep engaged and keep going. So what I'm going to talk about now is specifically about Puppet 4. So I mentioned Puppet 4 a little bit earlier today, and we've various folks have talked about it throughout the day. I'm going to dive in a little bit into the details about Puppet 4 and what it's all about, and why you should be interested in it, and where we're headed with it. So one of my musical heroes is David Byrne, and he said in this song, "Once in a Lifetime," it's a deceptively simple kind of pop song. It's actually really deep. It's about the loss of identity and sort of your loss of your sense of self. But he says, how did I get here? How do I work this? This is not my beautiful life. But so I wanted to go back and show a little bit of history about how we got here over to Puppet 4. This is my slide that I had subtitled "Give Edward Tufte an Aneurysm," because it's kind of the worst data visualization slide ever. It shows on the y-axis the amount of Puppet, and on the x-axis the linear flow of time into the future. So as you can see, the time for us starts in September of 2009, and when Puppet sort of emerged from its pre-alpha stage and started to get used in large-scale production. Is anybody here from, did anybody use 0.25 in their lives? I'm the only one. All right. It was a great release. It was really good. It had a lot of cool stuff in it. Between 2009 and 2010, Luke decided that that zero number was actually really inaccurate because it was starting to get used in large production sites. And so instead of going from 0.25 to 0.26 or something else or 1.0, we just went straight up to 2.6. So overnight, we immediately got 10 times more Puppet, which is pretty fantastic. And it's like, if you look at the slope there, it's just incredible. Just like right off the charts, the amount of Puppet that we got. In the 2.6 to 2.7 time frame, things started to slow down a little bit in terms of the numbering, but there was a fair amount of change. And although these numbers looked like semantic versioning, they looked like they had x.y.z, they actually weren't very strictly semantically versioned. So things would come in like 2.7.15 to 2.7.16 in particular looked like it would just be a little patch release, maybe like little things around the edges here, but there's actually a huge amount of change that got in there that broke a lot of people. And yeah, so that was not super great. I still personally bear scar tissue. I see a few people in the audience wincing at the memories of the dark days of 2016. But so once we got up to 3.0 in September 2012, we started being very strict about semantic versioning and really wanted to be able to rebuild some of that confidence around, like, if you saw a patch release, you would know that there was literally just a patch in there, right? If you saw a feature release, so 3.0 to 3.1 or whatever, there would be something new, something hopefully cool that you liked, and maybe some bug fixes as well, but we would guarantee that it would be backwards compatible. This went on for a year and a half, as you can see, between September 2012 and April 2015. The other crazy thing is that although the data points are evenly spaced along the x-axis, they're actually wildly varied in the amount of time that's in between those. So yeah, it's just all wrong. It's all kinds of wrong. The more I worked on this chart, the more I liked how awful it was, and I was like, I'm just going to go with it. We'll just roll with it. But what happened was we had a bunch of feature releases in 3.0. There in the 3 series. 3 went all the way up to 3.8, which released a couple months ago. And lots of great functionality came in, as we talked about earlier today, around the environment changes, some cool new capability for Windows, cool new capability on the new Unix systems. We took advantage of like the whole systemd revolution sort of happened in that time frame, so we have all Puppet to deal with that sort of stuff. But there was a accumulation of those backwards incompatible changes over time because we didn't want to drop those into a feature release, but yet we didn't want to incur a bunch of major versions. So it turned out that there was a fair amount of lead time in between throughout the 3 series, maybe longer than I'm super happy with, but it worked out pretty well. We released Puppet 4 in April, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. Because there were a lot of those backwards incompatible changes that stacked up, there's definitely some things you need to watch out for. So what are those things? Well, the more you know about them, the happier you are. I'm going to talk about 3 main categories of those changes. Language is a big one. We've heard about that a little bit today. The packaging and the delivery of the bits that you get and download has changed a bit. And there's some network communication stuff that you should be aware of. So in order, language. So I'm going to leave this code up for a minute. There's a lot of sort of hilarious badness in this talk, which I hope people will appreciate. So how many people have written? Well, first off, is this anybody's code? Like, do you recognize this? I pulled it off of GitHub, and it's totally not an attempt to like publicly call people out or shame them or anything, because it's not your fault that Puppet worked so terribly that these are the sorts of things that you had to do. And just to step through it a little bit, what this code is doing is trying to guard against getting some variables passed, getting some parameters passed into it that would cause the module to blow up in a weird way, like to cause ensure to be the enable variable, the enable parameter not to be set, which would cause Puppet to have an error. So, but there's not a strong assertion about like, hey, is this actually, is it actually there? Is it not there? Is it a Boolean? Is it the string YES in quotes, which is different from something actually being a Boolean true value? So all of this stuff sort of was an offshoot of these this early language parser that Luke wrote in 2005, 2006. It was fueled by caffeine and burning hatred, and just wanted to get a version of Puppet out there that worked. And a lot of the behavior that came out of that original parser is sort of had emergent properties, not designed properties. So once those things kind of get out in the wild, it becomes really hard to undo them and say, well, we didn't actually mean for that to be false. We have to, because now there's tens of thousands of lines of code out in the world that have the sort of elaborate guards around it. So that's where this sort of stuff came from, and it's not bad. Again, I don't mean to make anybody feel sad. It's not your fault. It's Puppet's fault, and things are better now. So all of this sort of stuff kind of collapses down in Puppet 4 to something that looks like this. It's like we're going to say that this is a Boolean that needs to be either true or false. There's the variable, and it's going to default to true. The same thing for server. It's going to default to false. That's it. That's it. No more of this, sort of is he or isn't he sort of mind games. You just kind of say what you want it to look like. This is This is a byproduct of the type system that's in Puppet, which is new. Puppet always sort of had types, and I don't mean types in the type of provider sense. I mean types in the data type sense of strings and integers and Booleans and that sort of stuff. But they were sort of weak. There were sort of very weak promises or weak guarantees around what type a particular piece of data would be. So now you can tell whether we're getting past a value with the correct data type inherently and not have to do a lot of archaeology to figure things out. This particular code, and there's much more of it. I have the URL down at the bottom if you want to see the rest of it. It's from a community member named Justin Lambert, who wrote this for his company, Even Up. And he just dove in can you dive with your feet? I almost said he dove in with both feet, which seems like a really bad mixed metaphor. He dived in head first. He dove in head first into the Puppet 4 type system and converted all their production code to use this sort of stuff a few months ago. And it's just wonderful to see that uptake, and he's super excited about how that works. So some real world stuff if you want to poke through. And these are I clipped this out just so that it looked good on the screen, but this is a fully functioning sort of Death Star of modules that they use for managing their production applications. So if you want to poke through and see what that type system looks like in real world production use, the even up modules are a great place to do that. Any questions or comments on that? I feel like there's few enough people here now that, although I know that you know that if you ask questions that will delay the beer, but if you have anything, feel free to holler. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Have there been any performance implications of that?
Have there been performance implications of it? Probably. Everything has performance implications. I think that it's generally going to be better, but I don't know for sure. I don't think we've directly measured like pre-4 versus post-4, the same code paths, one tight check and one not. Yes?
So I think there's something to be said about programmability. I mean, in the early days, bytes and disk space and CPU processing power was at a premium, and that's sort of increased. So now maintenance becomes the bottleneck.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So your point was that we no longer need to be like super. It's much more important for your code to be comprehensible and to be maintainable than it is for it to be like hyper compact. Yeah, and I guess the point here is that it is more maintainable. Although there's an interesting swing in the pendulum kind of back towards low resource usage, not necessarily like carefully hand-tooled assembly routines, for your systems administration stuff, but with things like Docker and small memory environments, we want the footprint of our systems tools to be reduced again. We kind of had, I feel like, a time of kind of bloaty tools kind of wobbling around on the system and the process table. A root puppet itself is fairly heavyweight in the sense that it requires a whole Ruby interpreter to run, and for some operating environments, some use cases, that ends up being like quite a burden. So, for instance, when we're getting Puppet running on network devices and storage devices, those are both lower CPU power. It's not an infinite, 3 gigahertz Opteron Pentium, Opteron that we're running, that they're now like back down onto ARM hardware, and the memory environment's really low. So that's driving the rewrite of our agent side code into like C++. So we just wrote a factor in C++ specifically to make it run a lot tighter and take up a smaller footprint. So it's not true that disk and CPU and stuff are free. There's actually a little bit of a reaction back to smaller footprint. Anyways, we'll talk about that more with beer. Keep going here. Next important development is around iteration and lambdas. So lambda and the lambda calculus and that sort of stuff is one of those fancy computer sciencey terms that people throw out. Everyone uses lambdas all the time. You just don't necessarily know that they're called that. It's just some routine, some chunk of code that doesn't have an explicit name on it, right? And I'm trusting Andy to keep me honest, and that he knows more about this stuff than I do. So like the inside of a for each loop. If you make a for loop, the inside of your for loop is essentially a lambda. And Puppet now has the ability to do these in the language. I don't have a before and after on what you had to do before this was available in order to get an iteration over a simple list, because it's just too embarrassing. Like, it's really pretty terrible that you had to make a defined type and pass an array as the defined type and then use the title of that to get at the variable that you were actually passed in on that iteration of the loop. It was pretty rotten. But now it sort of looks much more, semi-Ruby-ish. The vertical bars around the local variable, the string binary, are kind of Ruby-esque. And the dot each is saying that we're going to iterate over these. There's a bunch of other similar functions like each that you can use. You can do stuff like filter, like a grep sort of thing, through a list and return just the items in the list that match. And what we're doing in the resource block here on lines 5 through 8 is just defining a file resource that has each one of these titles in it. And again, this seems sort of pretty not super rocket science-y, but it was way difficult before in the Puppet language, so now it's a lot more simple. Does this example make sense to everybody? Yep. Cool.
So the functions are native to the language and not part of like standard lib.
In
So
Ruby?
if you're doing the each up there, it's inside the Puppet ESL. It's not something that's like a function added.
That's correct, yeah. So these are built into the, I mean, they are still technically functions, and yes, they're contained in their own code, but they're part of the Puppet language, and they're distributed equivalent with Puppet. Let's see. Oh, so this example, by the way, is from the docs.puppetlabs.com section. There's a whole retooled the docs pretty extensively to talk about the new language features, and there's a great page that's just talks about the iteration features and Lambdas that you could do. So if you're interested in this, just pull it up on the docs site.
Does the new version have like an updated parser to show the whole manifest to check for what's next?
So if I understand the question correctly, it's does the new version have the ability to test manifests under the test manifests written under the previous parser to see if they will work? The answer is no. We have in the 3.x series, and this is sort of why we have a 3.8 version that's out now. In the 3.8 series, the parser that you turn on, that you opt into with -- parser equals future, so the future parser, which is now the current parser. I'm going to call that the 4x parser because it's too confusing to talk about the future now that the future is now. I think that was a Spaceballs bit or something. Soon, it will be soon. The 4.x parser it coexists alongside the 3x parser in the 3.8 series, and you can opt into it. You can test your existing manifest against the 4x parser by just turning on that flag, and as somebody, I forget who, since it's all kind of a blur now, mentioned earlier, you can turn that on per environment now. So you can say, just for my test environment, let me test all these manifests without affecting production, and make sure everything is okay. Additionally, as a product plug here, in PE 3.8, we have the ability to give you a catalog preview, like a diff between the old and new, and you actually get some really nice messages about, hey, this changed and maybe it shouldn't have, so you should check it out. This resource on this line had this value in the old one and this one in the new one. Go investigate that, and it's a really pretty awesome set of tools that help you do that migration step. However, in direct answer to your question, in Puppet 4, there is not the equivalent of -- parser equals previous or old or whatever name you would want to call it. It's just gone. So your migration path is really run 3.8 under the current parser, look for deprecation warnings, make sure that those go away. Run 3.8 with the future parser, make sure you don't get any new errors. Buy PE, run the PE catalog preview module and check that out, and then upgrade to Puppet 4 once you're good to go. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, if you can contrast that with, like, say, Perl. Well, Perl 6 is probably not a great example. It's I think you still can't run it. But say Python 3 was another. They kind of were like, down the torpedoes, all of you people. Thanks for writing all that code. See ya. And we tried really hard not to do that. Here's so in addition to those kind of top line features in the language, there's a few things that are different under the hood, and I'm just going to go through these relatively quickly, although I'm happy to dive in more if you want to delay your beer further. The first one is manifest ordering. So one of the surprising things about Puppet for people who are new to it is that if you write a single manifest with a bunch of resources in a file and then run Puppet apply on that manifest, the order in which those resources are evaluated does not directly correlate to the order in which they're listed in the file, which if you're used to writing batch files or Ruby or basically anything except for very obfuscated functional programming languages, like that's surprising to you. And it's just been that way it was actually a feature that was a misfeature that was implemented a long time ago, that the ordering ought to be opaque so that we force people to explicitly state their dependencies. And that became kind of a point of philosophical purity in the Puppet community for several years, which is actually kind of interesting. This thing that was like, in order to use Puppet, you must first punch yourself in the face. And then, 2 years on, somebody new walks in and is like, hey, how's it going, everybody? And everybody's like, it's fine. Wait, why are you guys all punching yourself in the face? That makes no sense. So people who are new to it would sort of hit this wall and feel like, wow, that's very strange. So, and it was, totally an arbitrary decision. So actually, Andy did a lot of this work and made it so that the resources are evaluated in the order which you list them in the files. And again, a very, very simple thing that took a long time to get out the door, and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
So if you still have resource declarations and they're not in the same order, will respect your explicit ones before those.
Absolutely, yes. So the question is, if you have used if you're used to punching yourself in the face and you have before and required. So some of those meta parameters are still necessary, right? Because there's no way implicitly for Puppet to know that you need to restart a service when the file changes. You need to put the subscribe parameter on that in order to make that happen. Then those are obviously still going to work. And if you had gone through and put before or requires in your manifest so that things happen in a particular order, which oddly enough, this is one of those test pilot sessions that the experience blew my mind, because I did this test. We had a lot of FUD around, if we do this, the world will end, it'll be terrible, like everything will blow up. And so we went and talked to users and did screen sharing session, and people had these before and after relationships in their manifest in order for them to run in the order that they were listed in the file. And literally somebody on the screen sharing session just commented out each one of those things, and it ran exactly the same. It was kind of mind-blowing. But for those ones which actually signal not just sequencing but actual dependencies, obviously you're still gonna want those in there, and those are always going to continue to work. Structured facts are another one, where the facts previously could only be simple strings. You couldn't have a fact that had like an array of stuff, or a JSON style hash, or even just any kind of key value nesting. And that was enabled optionally throughout the 3 series and with Factor, and now it's just on by default. So all your facts are going to come, if you write a fact that is an array and has a list of things, those will be preserved as an array when they hit the Puppet language, which is pretty cool. We also have a bunch of new facts that come in now from Factor that have this sort of nested structure. So if you're used to, in your manifest, having like interfaces was a good example, because the interface list was terrible. Like there was, you would have one fact that was interfaces, and it had a comma-separated list of all the interfaces. And then there was a separate fact which had interface underscore, and then each one of those things. But there was no way to tie those together. Now those are all in a nice JSON structure, which I can show you in a minute, that looks like a very native representation of what your interfaces actually look like. It's a lot better to work with. And honestly, I wish we'd been able to do this like 3 or 4 years ago, because it's how things should have been, I guess. There's also a new function API. We mentioned, you asked about the functions earlier. One of the problems with functions in the old system was that you could, once you loaded one up, even if it was inside an environment that was different from other Puppet environments that you had, once it was loaded, that was it. You could never unload it, you couldn't change it, and it would be globally available across all the environments. And that was a new function API that, in addition to fixing some of the internal sort of API problems with the old one, now allows you to have actually different functions with the same name in different environments that have different code in them, which can help a lot of that code testing, code promotion bleed through. And again, check out that catalog preview module if you're interested in this upgrade. Packaging. Let's talk about packaging. By the end of the Puppet 3 lifetime, our repositories for downloading Puppet had become something very akin to my Facebook relationship status. It's complicated. It was really complicated, and there was all these files that you had to download to get a working Puppet installation. Like it just became too much to handle. So one of the there were lots of dependent packages, lots of moving parts, and so we made this move to an all-in-one package. So this is also known as Omnibus packaging. Omnibus is the name of a tool that Chef developed. It's also a name for having a bunch of things in one, or it's just called all-in-one. But it's essentially, we have a Ruby stack, the dependency, the OpenSSL dependencies, Puppet itself, Hyra, Factor, mcollective, all in one package. And this is the same. This is how the Windows Puppet distribution has been since its inception, pretty much. But for the Linux systems, which had more sophisticated package management, like, well, we'll just let the system dependencies, system package dependencies sorted out. Turned out that became really unwieldy. So now it's, we're going back to like just a single package. Also, the locations of things on the file system moved around a little bit in order to normalize them. And this is, we have a module that will help you upgrade, that will actually do an upgrade for you from a running 3.x agent and put your config files and certificates and everything in place for the 4.x file system. But things have moved around a little bit. And they moved in line, most things moved in line with the way Puppet Enterprise installs things, so that if you start out with Puppet 4.1 and later upgrade to Puppet Enterprise, then you don't have to reinstall all your agents. It's the same agent everywhere. It's the same code base, exact same file location. So there's that. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
It's a little backwards. So that's more about archiving the older versions of packages. We have a distro that isn't up on your guys' RPM list anymore. It's an old Fedora distro. Any way you could get RPM for it? Or?
Get the RPM for it. So the RPMs for the RPMs for the versions of Puppet that were active when that version of Fedora was active are probably still archived, maybe? We could put no, they're deleted. Yeah, we're not gonna, so we try to hew pretty closely to the support lifecycle, particularly for like the Fedoras and the non-LTS Ubuntus that come and go really quickly. We're gonna not build new packages for those things. But if there is, could you pay me to get it? You could.
Like you send you an email like the Puppet.
Oh, ping me. Yeah, oh no. I thought you said pay me, which I'd be like, yeah. If it's there and we have it archived, we can get it there.
Can you still install 4.0 with not the Omnibus?
Can you install 4.0 without the Omnibus? Yes, you can. You can install it. There's both tarballs, which will produce single just Puppet packages. If you run it from source. There's also gem installations, and obviously from GitHub source, you can get that and build single packages from it. We are not distributing operating system-based packages for Puppet 4, right? That are not Omnibus packages. They're all the Puppet Labs provided Puppet 4-based packages are all in one. I know that Fedora and maybe the Ubuntu maintainers have made single package Puppet 4-based installations, but they're sort of on their own in terms of the distribution maintainers are maintaining that packaging.
The question I ask is because I've used an Omnibus package for the software, GitLab, and there were a lot of things that weren't supported completely that were in traditional source-based install. So,
are there limitations for continuing to do the source-based installs? No, I think that's all the same. It's just that you're sort of on your own in terms of like making sure it matches up to the Ruby compatibility, because we're gonna test much more. We're gonna test our packages and like make sure that the agents and masters talk to each other, that they work with the right version of for distributing Ruby 2.15, and we're sort of standardizing Ruby 2.15. So if you're relying on your operating systems, your distro's Ruby, it could be either way newer in the 2.2 series, or it could be way older in the 1.8.5 series. And I'm not going to say that those are, like, if you run into something that's a Ruby problem, it's probably not too much of a good.
All the configuration files, like the .conf files, are they still the .conf files, or are they .rg files now that have like Ruby hooks in to manage with original conf files? And then are all those settings still mappable?
Pretty sure that all of the, are you looking up here or something? I'm not sure which ones you mean. So the pub.conf is still pub.conf. The location may be different, the faults may be different, but pub.conf is still the same. The other stuff that moved around, I mean, this is, so I see Puppet Labs, Puppet has it. I think the other one to point out is the faults in the area, and Liz talked about this earlier, but the place for your Puppet code is now Etsy Puppet Labs code. And this was an intermingling of things. It used to be that you would have a site.pp that was right under Etsy Puppet. You'd have a modules directory that was there. There's an environments directory that had some other modules. All that stuff is consolidated under this code directory, Etsy Puppet Labs code, so that your hire data, the root of your environments, your hire.yaml, and your module path are all sort of in one place. And this is to enable stuff like an R10K based workflow that has a really a single file, a single place to start your Git repository from, and be like, everything underneath this code directory is in Git. We don't have a piece that's here, a piece that's in this other directory. It's all sort of consolidated into that one spot. So this may take a little, the upgrade, the Puppet agent module, as it's called, which will handle the upgrade from 3.x to 4, will move stuff. If you have things that are in really far-flung places, we're probably not going to grab them all, so be aware of that. But I think overall this was something that we needed to do, and which also I think will benefit everybody that's trying to build these workflows, particularly once you get into the environment promotion and R10K based stuff, because it's so much more in line. In fact, this directory structure, we worked really closely with Adrian and our R10K team to make sure that what we're in the professional services as well for the customer deployments, to make sure that what we were doing was in line with what the best practices were, both from the community as well as internally. So I think it's a little bit of a weird, just have to sort of reprogram your finger macros to go to a different place, but it ends up making a lot more sense. Any other questions from that? On here, almost through. So I have a deep love of really bad stock photos, in addition to my terrible data visualization, and the multicultural handshake is like top. I always try to work one of these in. It's either this one or like the frustrated person in front of a computer messing up their hair. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the agent-server communication in Puppet, which is kind of a handshake. Sort of think about it like that. There are TCP handshakes involved, so it's thematically appropriate. So this is a time sequence diagram I made a long time ago about how the agent talks to the master. And I have not had the opportunity to go back and redo this for the new communication path, so I'm not going to do a A/B before and after test on this one. But I did want to point out that one of the things that was problematic about this, and the thing that changed, is that every single request that goes from the agent to the master, there are HTTP requests, right? They may be weird HTTP requests, but they're ultimately just HTTP. And they have this, the environment that the agent thinks of itself as being in prefixed on the front of all of those requests, which causes a lot of problems when we're trying to be more dynamic about environments, and we're trying to allow nodes to move through environments. We're trying to do things like plug and sync down some custom facts which determine what environment a node ought to be in, because maybe they got it from the wrong environment. So there's a bunch of complication around that. And one of the big changes in Puppet 4 is that that environment prefix is removed from it, and we can now do things like run a Puppet server, run a Puppet master, a Puppet DB, RBAC service, and the classifier service, run them all underneath the same JVM container and have actual separation between those different apps, because we don't have Puppet just squatting on the top of the namespace with any random string that might potentially be a valid word. So this necessitated a major version backwards incompatible break. But what we've done is in the Puppet Server 2.1 release that went out yesterday, 2 days ago, there's a Puppet 3x agent to Puppet 4 master compatibility layer, so that all the URLs that come in from those your existing Puppet 3 agents will be routed correctly to the Puppet 4 master, so you can have the traditional sort of like our message for upgrades has always been just upgrade your masters first, and then upgrade all the agents. And with the Puppet Server release, that's still the case. And it sort of transparently will allow them to connect and make it go through. That's all on that. Any questions on network? This is. I would like to do I'll do the time sequence for the new one, because it's actually pretty interesting. There's a lot. When we reduce the number of back and forth quite a bit, so you get some efficiency there. Plus, like I said, that it's a lot easier to figure out where the calls are going. There's a few other things that I'm just going to blast through. Most of these are covered in the Puppet 4 release notes, and all of them are. There's a section on breaking changes. Again, that migration strategy of just trying things out, trying out the feature parser first, and then upgrading your stuff should catch like 99% of it. That 1% will destroy your entire production environment. But just joking. But these are things like directory environments, which you mentioned earlier. The way that we do, way that you configure environments in Puppet.conf and where they point is now squarely on directory environments. There used to be 3 or 4 different ways to do it. You settle on that. There used to be a tool called Puppet Doc, which lets you generate HTML documentation out of your manifests, and that doesn't work with newer Ruby, so we rewrote a tool which does work. That's called Puppet Strings. It's a cute metaphor. Hopefully it's not annoyingly cute and we don't hate ourselves for having picked a Puppet metaphor 6 months down the line. But it's actually a much more capable tool than the old one. It's really awesome. And if you use templates, there were 3 or 4 different ways to get at variables, your Puppet language variables from inside a template before, and now there's basically just one. You just use an @ sign prefix inside of the ERB template, and that'll get you access to the variables. And the biggest one, actually, by number, it's a tiny change, but in terms of the number of places that it hits and the number of places that people have to change, the file resources. If you used to be able to specify the mode of a file with an unquoted numeric string, right? It just sort of sometimes looked like a UMask. It looked sort of like a number, maybe had a leading 0, and Puppet would sort of try to figure out what it was that you meant. Mostly it worked, so occasionally it got things horribly wrong. Now because of that ambiguity, we made it so that those modes have to be a quoted string. So if you have this is the number one complaint that people that are migrating over to Puppet 4 run into, is that you have to go through your file notes and quote them. And the catalog migration tool and even the deprecation warnings that come out just from running Puppet with feature parser will tell you when it runs across one of those.
You have to drop the lead 0 too.
You do not, well, because you're quoting it, you don't have to drop the lead 0. So this is a 1000.4 in Futura, because Futura is awesome. Yeah, so that is my whirlwind tour of changes in Puppet 4. There are, like I said, probably more. There are probably not more that will affect your life greatly. I tried to cover the highest points there. I would really appreciate it if you try it out and let directly, or let the bug tracker know, or let the mailing list know what you run into. We're going to release a Puppet Enterprise version that's based on Puppet 4 later on this summer, and we really want the open source community to try it out, have a chance to put it through its paces. We want to keep the pace of innovation up pretty high. I don't want to have another year and a half gap in between major versions before Puppet 5. 3 months is probably too short. 12 months is probably too long, so somewhere in between there we'll probably come out with Puppet 5. Batch up. I can pretty much guarantee you there's not going to be another batch of language changes. We're kind of done with the language for now. We'll keep that settled down, but there may be some other things that necessitate another semantic version major. Yeah. So, drinks? Shall we retire? Yes.
Still taking questions?
Sure. If you want to, I'll tell you what. Let's break. You can come up and ask me whatever you want. That way, we're not. You won't incur the ire of the rest of the audience. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Eric.